All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here are going to be reacting to Virginia Tech naming new leadership for its football program and former Penn State head coach James Franklin. Franklin was abruptly fired by Penn State earlier this year after failing to meet high expectations, being top 3 in the AP poll, and they quickly fell to a 500 record. 104 wins, 45 losses, 11 plus years at Penn State, though. Highly notable, really took that program from a very dark place and elevated them to a perennial contender. Obviously, the lack of success in those ranked games was his biggest knock. 12 and 25 record against top 25 opponents. If you're listeners of the show, you know college football, and you're well aware of the accomplishments and the negatives of him at Penn State. Not much really to focus on there. It's really about what he's going to be doing moving forward with this program at Virginia Tech. The Hokies have swung and missed, Nick, on a couple of head coaches as of late. Brent Pry, who was also a former Penn State defensive coordinator, and then, of course, they had Justin Fuente, who was not very good coming over from Memphis for Virginia Tech. They've really lacked stability in their football program, really since Frank Beamer moved on in 2015. That guy had an abundance of winning seasons. I don't even know how many in a row he had. I know at one point they had 8 straight 10-plus winning seasons. I mean, they had great success, Nick, and this team was at the top of football, and that was back in like the BCS days, right? So only 2 teams could make the national championship. If there was a 12-team playoff back then, I think the Beamer would have had a lot more success, could have had some deep playoffs runs. Long story short, there were some great teams in Blacksburg, Nick, and I think that they're looking to reclaim that glory they can absolutely have. And James Franklin, it's a low-risk, high-reward candidacy, right? Because the last guys they've had, they were taking risks on, didn't really work out. This is a guy that's had proven success. He's a program builder. He's a winner. And I know that the record against top 25 teams is not great, but it's not. And I made the point, right, and I'm trying to defend him as best as I could because I respect him. I think he's a great coach, and he built those expectations, right? You failed to deliver on expectations that you created, and I think people kind of get lost in that he's the one that did that. There's a reason why you're expecting to win national championships and Big Ten titles because of his elevation of the program. And I think coming over to Virginia Tech, where they've really struggled to even make bowl games over the last couple of years, this should instantly be a success for James Franklin. A lot to get into here and for why this can be successful, but the immediate reaction from me is this is a great hire. I had Franklin predicted to go to Florida, and I still wish I could have saw that. So I'm a little bit bitter about that, Nick, but I think for Franklin, I'm very happy for him, and I'm very happy for Virginia Tech as well.
Yeah, I think this is a great hire for Virginia Tech. I think it's a slam dunk hire. They went out and got their man. A lot of people question whether or not they'd be able to go get a big name hire when they were one of the first jobs that opened up this year. It didn't really work with Brent Pry. It was just not having the success that they were hoping for. And same thing with Justin Fuente before that. And you wondered if they were going to be able to go out and get that big swing candidate, right? They've swung for the fences in the past, trying to grab high profile candidates and had to settle for lesser candidates like Fuente and Pry. And now they went out and got one of the bigger fishes in the pond. This is a huge hire. This is a proud program. They had like a 20-year bowl streak at one point during the Beamer era that kind of bled into that Fuente era as well a little bit here. They didn't play in a bowl game, obviously, in 2020. They opted out of one, but prior to that, they had been in so many straight bowl games, missed one in 2022 in the first year under Brent Pry. He took them 2 straight bowl games after that in 23 and 24, but obviously results were just not to the level. They have a great stadium. They have a great fan base. They have great energy and a lot of positivity down there in Blacksburg, and I think having a coach like James Franklin in there who's been known to build programs, right? He built Vanderbilt back up, got them to 2 9-win seasons when they have been just historically one of the worst teams in the SEC and in the Power 4. And then he took Penn State that was coming off of massive scandal sanctions and really in a dark place. And yes, Bill O'Brien laid some of that foundation, but he built off that foundation and kind of catapulted them into the national spotlight again by getting to that Rose Bowl in 2016, winning the Big Ten that year in a really impressive fashion and rattling off a couple, double-digit win seasons in 17, 19, 22, 23, and then obviously last year going to the national semifinals. I think this is a really good hire. He's a guy that's got a lot of good recruiting ties in that region here. You're going to plug him in, I think, get a lot of success. I don't know if they're going to win a national title necessarily, but I think they'll certainly be competitive in the ACC.
Yeah, let's talk about why this could work, right? Franklin, like we alluded to, program builder. A lot of his staffs have produced some nice coaches, and he's done a lot for a lot of those guys throughout the years during, a decade plus of his tenure. The 2016 staff, for example, had numerous head coaches and other guys that could also be future head coaches like Joe Brady, Tim Banks as well. And you talk about the recruiting ties, right? And I looked at the last couple of recruiting classes. His top-ranked recruit in the last 3 came from the states of New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania. Picks up a couple of recruits per year already in the state of Virginia. some very talented players as well, including guys like Tony Rojas, who I think could potentially transfer over to Virginia Tech. So the recruiting ties are notable, right? So you don't have to really transition much in that regard. Obviously, it's not going to be as desirable to bring recruits to Virginia Tech as it would be at Penn State, but I think that allows him to kind of focus on some of the lesser notable guys that are not going to get as much attention. Because when you're at Penn State, you want the highest of the highs, right? You don't want those top 100, top 150 guys. Now you can kind of focus on 3 and 4 star players. Franklin's been a phenomenal developer, in my opinion. Tight end university right now is Penn State. They got like 4 or 5 different guys in the NFL right now. They've produced a tremendous amount of defensive talent, and I think that Franklin really thrives in those areas and doesn't get enough respect for it, Nick. And I know there's a lot to say about, Drew Aller, 5 star quarterback, didn't pan out, had all these running backs this year, didn't work out, and I get it, right? I totally understand, but the body of work is still evident, still going to be able to do a lot with less. That's kind of what happened in the beginning, right? Had to do more with less, and they were able to accomplish that, and they continuously built their program around development of players and his development of fellow assistant coaches as well. These things don't get talked about enough, and that's why Franklin is a sneaky great candidate for a mid-tier school like this, especially in this conference.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think you just nailed a bunch of key points there. I do want to highlight one thing that I'm thinking about is what will the offense at Virginia Tech look like under James Franklin? We know the defense is going to be really strong. They're going to be good in the trenches, particularly really solid on the defensive line that's going to be able to produce sacks and get after the quarterback. But what will the offense look like? What type of quarterback he's going to try and plug in? We've seen Virginia Tech recently try to go towards quarterbacks that were more mobile, could use their legs a little bit in the past at Penn State. James Franklin, majority of the time, had quarterbacks that were more pocket passers, pro style type of players like Drewer and other ones. There have been some quarterbacks during the Penn State Franklin era that were able to move on the ground, but mostly it was guys that could stand in the pocket and really be those accurate type of players downfield. But Penn State was really seemingly missing a quarterback. That was the entire tenure really was missing that quarterback that could elevate the team. Drew Aller was supposed to be that guy, and it worked out at times. And obviously he got a bad rep for some of the mistakes that he made, but by and large he was still a pretty strong quarterback. What is that going to look like for James Franklin? What type of quarterbacks is he going to go out and get? Obviously, I think his offensive coordinator will play a role in that as well. There's a lot of talent in Virginia. Obviously, not as much talent as some of the other states in the nation, and particularly in the South, but there is some talent in Virginia. And I think plugging himself into the in-state recruiting, he'll be able to commit to that. He was previously at Maryland where he was doing good recruiting as an assistant. So he has some ties to that area there, the D.C. area particularly. I think there's a lot of good talent in that Baltimore, Washington, D.C. area in our nation's capital. A lot of good talent coming out of some of those prep schools there. If he can go into that area and recruit some of those stronger pieces that maybe slipped through the crack from those top ACC and SEC programs, this could be a really big thing. I think the ACC is a league where he will be very competitive very early. He'll have a great defense. The defense will always be strong. I think it's always just going to be a staple of him. What will the offense look like? I think that's a key thing. And obviously, we'll talk about the staff in a second here, and that will play a role in it. But if he can get himself an offense that's going to be consistent and able to put points on the board, Virginia Tech will be a very strong team in the ACC.
Couple more positives I want to talk about. This is a team that's not going to face lengthy expectations. They're going to be quite reasonable. And I also think that the path to the playoffs is much easier in this conference. Everyone knows that. If you've watched football this year, the ACC is a laughable joke at this point, right? Blacksburg's a great college town, though. I mean, this is a great family environment. This is an engaged fan base, even with the limited success as of late. Enter Sandman, one of the best entrances, most iconic in football. The atmosphere at Virginia Tech, Nick, is phenomenal. And if you can, up the ante with excitement, kind of look at what Deion Sanders did with Colorado, right? These guys, we don't know how good or bad we're going to be, but we're here, and the environment is amazing. And I think Virginia Tech with Franklin is definitely going to provide that type of ante. And I think when it comes to those ranked matchups at home, big games, man, it's crazy to watch on TV, and I'm sure in person it's incredible. Phenomenal stadium. I think the resources they have in terms of facilities. Yeah, sure, it's not the Texas Longhorns or anything, but I'm rather impressed with the facilities they have. A lot of commitment from this program. They have a nice indoor practice facility. I love the locker rooms that they have. Nice resources overall, and that's another thing about Virginia Tech that kind of gets overlooked that a lot of people have known about, but not everyone does.
I think it's very interesting when you look at that. That's why this job is one of the more intriguing ones of this cycle. I think the key thing was Virginia Tech getting out early and firing their head coach early in the cycle to kind of kickstart that thing and generate momentum. In 2022, they kind of fell behind the eight ball. There was a lot of high-profile jobs already open in 2022, and that kind of put them in a position where they were behind some of those other high-value, high-impressive jobs, some of those programs that have great facilities like Auburn's and the other ones in the SEC that were open in 2022. They got early. They got to jump on the ball and made themselves an attractive destination destination. That stadium is phenomenal. Lane Stadium is a very strong atmosphere that's got a great fan support. I kind of remember that game against UNC to open the season. I think it was in 2021 where they had a great crowd. You could hear the noise through the television. They ended up upsetting the Tar Heels on opening weekend. I believe it was on a Thursday, if I'm not mistaken. It might have been a Friday of that opening weekend of that season. So that's the type of thing you're going to get, right? If this team is firing on all cylinders, that crowd is going to be awesome. Even if they're not really playing their best football, the crowd's going to be awesome and committed to the cause, putting up a good fight every single week. You're going to play in front of a full sold out crowd that's going to be loud and really putting that dominant, factor behind you. In the ACC, I think the conference is pretty weak, right? I think it's the weakest of the Power Four conferences right now, behind the Big 12, dare I say. And I think this is a conference that, yeah, it's got some heavy hitters potentially, but it's got some teams that are going through some weird things. If James Franklin jump in there and really, get after it quickly, start recruiting, bringing talent out of the portal, they can be competitive in that conference very quickly and find themselves competing for ACC titles.
Now let's look at some of the negatives, right? Why could this end up being a complete backfire by Virginia Tech? And I think the biggest question is who's going to come from Penn State. I don't want to see anyone coming from Penn State, Nick. This needs to be a clean slate in almost the fullest regard. I think when it comes to the transfer portal, I think they should definitely look to bring some of those players over. Nobody from the staff, maybe one or two guys at most. But I want to see everything be completely different. I think maybe a couple of linemen because they were very deep and he recruited very well at that position. Tony Rojas, the guy that can come back home at linebacker. Deep tight end room as well. Maybe a running back or two. I think they have a running back on the roster from the state of Virginia, so that's like it, right? Maybe a couple of players from Penn State that come over to VT. But when it comes to this staff, Nick, it needs to be completely different. I don't want to see anyone coming from Penn State. I think that's just the best way for this to be successful, right? Whatever was happening at Penn State, it just wasn't enough, right? And that's a big reason why we weren't very successful in those ranked matchups, and we struggled to get over the hump. And I think another thing that's very important is who's the staff going to consist of? I know you alluded to it earlier. And I think most importantly, what's going to be changed in his approach? He was on College Game Day right after he got fired, and he was a very candid interview, right? And, it was awesome to see him do that after a very embarrassing moment. Just a couple of days later, he went ahead and did that interview on national television, and he talked about it. We're going to evaluate everything when it comes to our process, and something has to change, right? Can't be the same procedures that we had at PSU, and I think that those are the biggest question marks, right? And if he doesn't change those, or if he does, and it ends up not being, able to pay off the dividends like you expect it would when it comes to change, and that could definitely be a big failure for Virginia Tech. But those are the biggest keys, right? Outside of a couple players, nobody needs to be coming from Penn State. We need to completely redo our approaches and see how that can lead to different results.
Yeah, I agree, right? There's no need to bring a lot of talent from Penn State because there isn't really a lot of guys I think you should really try and drag along with you. A few pieces here and there, maybe. I think the coaching staff should be completely new. Maybe get some young offensive, minds in the offense, certainly the offensive coordinator. Maybe take a gamble on somebody. Obviously, there's a high risk, high reward there. Maybe hire a up and coming, coach who's either a quarterback coach, wide receivers coach at a program, somebody who's a bright offensive mind. Take a gamble on a young coordinator there. I think you can get a more veteran, experienced defensive coordinator, and I don't think a defensive coordinator is as pressing of a need as offensive coordinator. I think they got to really nail their offensive coordinator hire and kind of figure out what direction they want to go under center as well. I'm sure they'll go in the portal and try and grab a quarterback as well and kind of set that up and see what they can do in that regard. I'm curious to see what his approach will look like in hiring staff. I think maybe a mix of inexperienced and experienced guys, some guys that are breaking into the sport, some guys that have been around for a while. That could certainly help and benefit James Franklin and Blacksburg.
Yeah, a young offensive mind would be great. They had a solid one in Andy Kolanecki at Penn State. He was good at Kansas, came over and did some good things, but at times, like you said, it just wasn't enough, right? So I think some young offensive minds could certainly be beneficial. And it'll be interesting to see the depth overall of this program because he did great things at Penn State, doesn't get enough respect for. I think over here at Virginia Tech, things are going to work. You talk about national championship. I don't know if that's possible. I think maybe 5-6 years down the line with a lot of hard work. This is a team I think can compete right away in the ACC. We'll see how he does when it comes to the transfer portal. I felt like Franklin being available was great for whoever hired him, Nick, because usually you don't hire a coach until early December, right after week 14 or around conference championships. A couple weeks of a head start here for Franklin. I think that's going to be highly beneficial in today's day and age. So I think this is great. A-plus hire for Virginia Tech. They can consistently win 8-plus games a year, and I think this is going to elevate their ceiling tremendously, and I'm happy for both parties.
Yeah, A plus hire for me too. I think this is a great hire. I think this will come down to the best hire of the cycle when it's all said and done, unless LSU ends up grabbing Lane Kiffin. I mean, that would certainly usurp it because that would be a crazy home run hire for the Tigers. I think this is a good move for Virginia Tech. This is a guy that can win. I don't know if they'll win national titles. I've said that a couple times, but I think they'll win an ACC title or two under him. He'll be competitive in that conference. the conference isn't that deep. He'll be able to get in there, kind of get a jump start. I totally agree that getting him this early in the cycle is huge for your program. It'll give you an opportunity to kind of get a leg up and putting those pieces into place that are key for trying to jump into portal season where things are going to get absolutely hectic and a lot of names will move around. Yeah, I think there's a lot of positivity with this. I think Virginia Tech fans got to be over the moon today. People were expecting them to end up, whiffing on top hires, end up with somebody that they really didn't want, like a defensive coordinator or OC from, somewhere else in the ACC potentially, or in the Big Ten. But they went out and got the big fish. They got the best name on the board of the available coaches. Of course, there are some other good coaches that are certainly going to move around in this cycle. This is going to be a crazy cycle. This is already kicking off to be a crazy cycle. A lot of big jobs here, but Virginia Tech did a phenomenal job. The outlook for the Hokies is extremely bright. They're in a great spot down there, and they're really going to put together a great team under James Franklin. I can't wait to see the results on the field. The schedule isn't too difficult next year, so they may get some instant results. A really promising time for Virginia Tech, and should be a lot of fun to watch.
That's it for today's episode. Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.